Hello?
Hi, good afternoon. Sorry, if you just want to give us a few minutes, we're getting everyone to hop on right now and join.
Oh, yeah, that's fine. I'm just making sure you all can see and hear me.
Okay.
Can you hear me? Can you also see me?
Yes.
Okay, okay. Thank you.
Mhm.
Oh, I'm on mute. Hi, everyone. Hi, Xavier.
Hey.
Hey, nice to see you.
Likewise.
How have you been?
I've been doing well. I don't know, it's good timing for a presentation because usually I'm like running to get prepared and it's much earlier and it's like this is perfectly sitting snug in the middle of the day with no stress. So it's perfect.
Yeah, we started doing them at 12, and this is usually like pretty set for most of the events we have at 12. That's true. I agree because it gives you some time to get ready and get prepared, do like all the background stuff beforehand.
Yeah, it's perfect.
Yeah. So since your organization is based in DC, is that where you're based at?
I live here in Chicago.
Oh,
My
okay.
organization is based in DC.
Oh, okay.
And which in the past meant that I would travel there quite often, but that's yeah. So we're all just very much virtual now. So
Yeah, that's good.
I like that background. Is that where you are now?
No, I mean that I don't know how San Francisco is doing right now, but I'm sure it's like the rest of the places. This is just like a standard
Yeah.
Zoom background. I mean, this would be a nice view to be at though.
Yeah, exactly.
So we still have a few minutes before we get started. Um, I don't know if you can see, but we have some team members that are on the call right now.
Yeah.
And they're going to be helping us out with a few like background stuff. Like Edgardo's going to help a lot of people in the room. And Cassandra and Samantha are here to like support us and just make sure things go smoothly. We're going to have our our center director, Melissa Simon, joining in a little bit. She'll probably be joining closer to 12. So in the meantime, as she joins and start joining the Zoom meeting, I'll do a few introductory slides. And depending on when Dr. Simon joins, either I'll do your introduction or she will.
Okay, no problem. Thank you.
Sounds good. And your audio looks good. Your audio sounds good and your video looks good. And will you be sharing slides?
No, I won't be. No
Okay.
slides. Yeah.
Okay, sounds good.
Thank you. So I'm gonna plug in just to make sure the audio is still good.
Yeah, let's try that out.
Still works well? Still, okay.
Sorry, you were putting your headphones on and I thought I might as well too. All right, can you say something just so I can
campaign for the fair
Test.
sentencing of youth.
Yep, sounds good. How does that sound for everyone else that's on the call for Samantha and
It
Cassandra?
sounds really low on my end, almost like a
Oh.
very soft whisper.
Okay, maybe I should talk up a little bit more. Is that better?
Yeah, it's hard for me to hear too.
Is that better?
Okay. Yeah, wait, I can see what they're saying. I think it was a little bit louder without the headphones, unless you can bring in the mic a little bit closer.
Or it's better like this?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's great.
How about, yeah, Cassandra agrees.
Okay. Is that I hear you all better when I put the headphones on. But yeah,
Oh.
it's
Mic closer to your mouth when you're talking. Is that any better?
Yeah, if you bring it up a little bit.
I'll move it in front of me a little bit more. How does that work?
I think it sounds, yeah, it still sounds kind of far away. So maybe like, I don't know, because I see the mic here on your right side.
Yeah, I'm wondering if you actually like pull it up like closer
hold
to your
it.
mouth if we can hear you better.
Like this?
Yeah, that sounds louder.
Well, I just changed the setting. Let me know. Do I generally sound better now?
It sounds a
Or is it
little
lower?
bit better, but still kind of low.
Okay. Same system. Built-in microphone, headphones, built-in output. Okay, then I'm gonna try to go without them, and then I'll just turn my volume all the way up. Hopefully, I can hear you all fine.
Okay. Let
Are
us
you able
know
to
if you.
adjust your Zoom audio settings so that the microphone is turned all the way up?
Yeah, I'm in the Zoom setting right now. Yeah.
I just heard you better now than I've heard you throughout this whole thing. So
Okay, then I'm gonna leave it like that.
okay.
Yeah, I'll leave it like that. Thank you.
But
There,
you can hear us, right?
yes, there was a way for me to actually increase the output volume, so I just did that. And I'm curious to know. I mean, I can go without, but I know we have like 1 minute or 2 minutes left. But let me just make sure you can. If it
Yeah,
sounds
if you want to test that one more time and just make sure that the volume is all the way up for output, and then we'll see how it goes.
that's what I just did right now. It's higher. It's higher now. Does that make sense? Does it work? Interesting. Can you all hear me?
You are still quiet, unless you want to like keep the headphones in, but just talk louder. I don't know how you feel about that.
Oh no, I'll go without them. I'll go without them. Let's see. So I'll just turn my volume up.
Okay, thank you. Sorry about that.
No, it's okay. It's okay.
Hi, everyone. We'll be starting shortly. Feel free to share your video if you're comfortable doing so. Just make sure that you're muted if you're not speaking or participating. But yeah, we always enjoy seeing the participants' videos on, so you can kind of get a sense of who's in the room. But thank you all for joining. We'll be getting started shortly. Okay, so we'll let people join in shortly, but in the meantime, welcome everyone. I hope you are all doing great. This has been a hectic week, so we appreciate you joining us today and participating, hopefully, in this event with us. My name is Araceli. I am a program assistant here at the Center for Health Equity Transformation. And sorry, I have a few screens up. And thank you for joining us for today's CHETchat. A few housekeeping items before we get started. Feel free to keep your video on. Like I said earlier, we really enjoy seeing the faces of the participants and who joins in these events. Just make sure to keep your audio muted. If you're not participating or asking questions, if you do decide to ask questions, please submit them using the chat box. You'll see that in the Zoom toolbar. And also you can use the raise hand participant feature that is under participants. If you have any questions, submit them in the chat box and someone from the chat team should be able to help you out. And today we have Xavier McElrath-Bey. He joins us from the Campaign for Fair Sentencing of Youth, and he is the co-executive director. And I believe Dr. Melissa Simon is going to be, yes, hi Melissa. She'll be doing a short bio to introduce you all to our speaker today.
I am super, super, super excited and proud and happy that and elated that Xavier has joined us today and agreed to speak. Xavier McElrath-Bey is just an amazing, amazing rock star. He is a champion for the rights of incarcerated children. As you heard, he's a co-executive director of the Campaign for Fair Sentencing of Youth. He fights every single day to abolish life without parole for children in America. And he makes good trouble doing this. So important. In recent years, he played a role in ending this practice in several states, including Nevada, Utah, Arkansas, South Dakota, and North Dakota. He is also a co-founder and proud member of the Incarcerated Children's Advocacy Network, and that's an initiative of the Campaign for the Fair Sentencing of Youth. And basically this group seeks to amplify the stories and voices of leaders who are incarcerated as youth. Now, I don't want to give away any other part of his bio because he's going to tell his story, and his story is so amazing, and how he connects his story to his purpose, and it helps drive him, and that's just amazing. So thank you, Xavier, for being here, and thank you for taking the time.
Thank you for having me. Yes, I just want to say thanks to all of you, actually. I know this is a very, very challenging time in our nation. And Melissa, thank you so much for helping to make this possible. And all the wonderful people who I've engaged with since, including Araceli, Magdalena. And I'm also very appreciative always of the people who are making sure our tech experience is seamless and a good experience for all. And so thank you, Cassandra and Samantha. Just wanted to really just share a little bit about the work and also about my story, but I also just want to recognize a moment and just to say thanks for being with me and spending this time with me. I'm seeing some very friendly faces, people who I know. Linda, I see your picture. I don't see you, but I know you're here with us. And so just happy to also have you here with us. There you are, Linda. When asked to share and speak to speak before audiences in the past, oftentimes it would be, we want you to say this, we want you to say that, we want you to do this and do that. And our planning call was very interesting and actually very exciting to me because they're like, speak from your heart, say and share what you want to share. And I'm like, what? I can share whatever I want to share. So that in and of itself, really, I was telling Araceli a little while ago, not only is the timing of this, having it situated snug in the middle of the day, but also not feeling the pressure of having to meet any expectation, but just to share from my heart is really something I look forward to. So thanks again and again. I feel It would probably be best if I share a little bit about the work that I'm doing first. I know that I can go a bit long in sharing my story, and I want to most importantly help you all understand the importance of this work. So I work for the Campaign for the Fair Sentencing of Youth. I joined the campaign in 2014 after 5.5 years of working for our amazing Linda Teflin here as part of the Northwestern Juvenile Project. And that experience at Northwestern, at the Feinberg building there at the downtown campus, and traveling across the city to meet folks, formerly incarcerated individuals in different parts of our city, oftentimes meeting them in their homes, but sadly, on other occasions, meeting them at abandoned buildings, at restaurants, on street corners, wherever they felt most comfortable and safe. Interestingly, their options for some of them weren't many. And I will never forget how, and during our structured clinical interview, I would ask questions that were very much, I wouldn't say intrusive, but for the most part, really touched upon the importance of trauma. We would ask how many times certain traumas happened in their life. We would ask at what age was the first time and how many times did that happen to you. And what I had seen and experienced over and over in those experiences, and throughout over 800 interviews that I had conducted as part of Northwestern Juvenile Project, I came to find that there was a dominant theme amongst many individuals who were just like me. That is, that before their very worst mistake, before that, the most regretted mistakes of their lives, unfortunately, they themselves were often victims of abuse and of violence. They themselves were in some occasions sexually abused. They themselves, unfortunately, had contemplated and even tried to commit suicide. And we're talking about children. At the baseline, they were between the ages, I think, of 11 and I think 14 or 15. And to hear these individuals, and looking back, through our study and how those traumas did not only did they not go away, but had only gotten worse. By the time I was meeting them, they were unfortunately gunshot victims. I'll never forget going to the west side of Chicago by Chicago and Laramie, going up 3 flights of stairs, and a mother letting me into the home, and me sitting down next to the subject of our study, who was still a young man in his late 20s, and he was riddled with bullets. He had bandages around his legs, he had one bandage on his head, and he was able to communicate, and he wanted to do the study. It's not that he questioned for a second whether or not he was capable of it. He just felt that his life could someday end, any day. He was afraid. His friends were downstairs. They were on security guarding the building he was in. And I think this was his way of telling his story. And I remember spending at least 4 or 5 hours just there, hearing him, being present with him. And though I was conducting the clinical research and what was supposed to be an objective and impersonal experience, I found myself in tears at times. And that was more so because I remember what I was going through when I was a child. I grew up in the back of the yards. I grew up on the south side of Chicago. I grew up in a neighborhood that sadly was very disinvested. My household struggled very much. My mother, as far back as I can remember, had contended with mental health problems, but sadly, much of that was undiagnosed and untreated for most of my childhood. In fact, for all of my childhood, it was undiagnosed and untreated. I just thought that it was normal to hear my mother talk to herself. I just thought it was normal to see my mother crying and saying no to the devil when he tempted her to drink alcohol. I thought it was normal when I saw my brother, who was also contending with the same mental health challenges, one time walking into the bathroom and seeing him submerge himself in the water of the bathtub up to his chest, fully clothed, looking down in tears, crying, and telling me and swearing up and down he was drowning in spirits. And for me, as a 9, 10-year-old child, and him being my older brother, I believed him. I believed that he was drowning in spirits. And I remember praying with him and crying with him. I remember being afraid. I remember thinking if my big brother is afraid, I should be afraid. And I also remember times when he would get very violent. In fact, he had on several occasions, fought me. One time he ambushed me coming in from school. And for me, like, though these things typically happen between siblings, For it to happen without cause was really just challenging for me. And so I was always on guard with my brother, but even more so with my stepfather. By the time I was 9 years old, having left the foster care system along with my siblings for a previous abuse of my stepfather, another stepfather, and being in the foster care system for 2.5 years in another abusive home with a foster mother who didn't believe in allowing us to have toys and entertainment, who often hit us with belts and hangers. When I met my new stepfather, Jose, it was just being met with much of the same. So between the age of 9 and 11, coming out of the foster care system and now having to deal with an alcoholic stepfather who would come home on Friday nights and break windows and bust the TV and, really just vandalize our home and looking and search for money. And the reason why he would do that is my mother would often go to the bar and steal the money from him to make sure we had money for rent. Sadly, that became my daily routine between the age of 9 and 11. At 11 years old, as soon as I learned my way around the neighborhood, I ran away. I hit the streets. And when I hit the streets, interestingly, I ended up, joining with a gang that, I thought was the greatest consolation of my life. I thought that being a part of this gang meant that I would be safe, that I would have the love, nurturing, and acceptance that I needed, that I would have, allies in what I saw as a very violent world in a community where I was seeing people getting shot. In the 1980s, it was super violent, unfortunately. And for me to have that sense of family and protection, and most importantly, the sense of belonging, I think that's what sent me over the edge. And not just in terms of responding to the needs, but more so in terms of trying to do all I can to retain that love and respect from my peers. And so what that meant for us, sadly, and and how that manifests for many kids across the city is really just, witnessing and encouraging each other to do increasingly more destructive things. It started with jumping from one garage to the next. It started with venturing into abandoned buildings. In fact, at 11 years old, that became my first, some of my first arrests came from, trespassing, going into abandoned buildings because I was trying to sleep there. Earlier ones for stealing quarters out of parking meters. Other ones were for stealing from stores. And so slowly but surely, I started to get engaged with the system. And by the time I was 11 years old, being surrounded by violence, having access to weapons, a friend of mine and two other friends, we were playing in an alley with the weapon. The gun went off. I was shot in my face. If you see that dimple here, it's not a dimple, it's actually a bullet hole. And when the bullet entered through my face, it tore through my sinus. It shattered the bone, and bullet fragments went in every direction. So I was instantly blinded. The blood lodged behind my left ear. I was bleeding out of my mouth, out of my nose. I was an 11-year-old kid who thought he was gonna die. And I remember praying and asking God, why me? Asking God to please let me live. And I remember trying to swallow my own blood and believing that that was what was gonna save my life. Because I thought that if I swallowed my blood, it would save my life. And I remember soon after that experience being arrested and charged with obstruction of justice. And it was about a week and a half, 2 weeks later, while I was still contending with a severely bruised face, a locked jaw, a bloodshot eye, and walking with bandages through my neighborhood, the police pulled up and told me that I was going to be charged with obstruction of justice because I had refused to tell on my best friend who had shot me by accident. So in their eyes, I was an 11-year-old victim. In their eyes, though visibly a child and very visibly a victim, they chose to see me as someone who had committed a crime. And so I entered into the Juvenile Temporary Detention Center at 1100 South Hamilton for the very first time after having accumulated all those points from the previous arrest and now having this obstruction of justice charge. I walked into the detention center for the very first time. Interestingly, I was taken to intake, went to the court. The judge gave me, I think, a few days. They forced me to go to court. They held me until the I guess the evidentiary hearing of my best friend. And there I pleaded with the judge and everyone in the room to not have him held accountable when they gave me a chance to speak because I knew it was an accident. I was crying, my mother was crying, his mother was crying, he was crying. Everyone in the courtroom, except for the judges, state's attorneys, and others, were crying. And I remember the judge looking down upon us with a very stern look and saying that he's going to give us all probation. And from that point forward, my engagement with the system had become increasingly more frequent. I was known to the police by then. So every time I was doing something wrong or anything that happened in my community, they would come and get me. I would be either taken in for questioning or for arrest. It was either always and most often the same. And that would be more or less an arrest if I had anything to do with it, obviously. By the time I was 13 years old, I had 19 arrests and 7 convictions. So imagine between the age of 9 years old and 13, and having all those arrests, going to the very same police station, and having engaged with the very same officers who know me, and who not only know me, but had taken it upon themselves to physically abuse me from time to time, whether it's for more information, whether it was just because they got upset with me, whether it's because they had chased me down, called me in the back alley. One time they called me in the back alley near a broken down vehicle, and I put my hands in the car and to surrender. And the officer said, "What's your name?" And I said, "What?" And he hit me. Boom. And when he hit me so hard that he gave me a black eye and busted nose with one hit. And I'll never forget the terror, the fear, the blood that flowed from my face onto the back of that vehicle. The officer saying, "Get the fuck out of here," because he couldn't find a gun. So understand my experience with law from a very young child up until 13, when I had personally done the very worst thing in my life, was very antagonistic, abusive to say the least. But I didn't have a sense of who in my life I can seek refuge in, except for the gang I was a part of. And so at 13 years old, when I stood in front of a judge being charged with murder, having been involved in the murder and being guilty, the judge decided in the instant that I was no longer a child. And I, looking back, obviously can recognize as an adult how that very poor decision as a child was really the manifestation of all those traumas that I experienced up until that point. It's easy for me to recognize that. But for me as a 13-year-old kid who had been involved in something so unfortunate, I was very remorseful. In fact, the very night that Pedro died, I remember running home, laying on my mother's couch, crying, asking God to forgive me. And though I did not physically kill Pedro, I was there, I was present. And though I did not anticipate it, when I saw it happening, I couldn't stop it. I was a child who was following older gang members who I felt, had my best interest, but surely did not have my best interests. And looking back, they were just as broken as I was. And unfortunately, we were trapped in a world where we were convinced that our own people were our enemies. And in that world, sadly, we didn't think about our future. We just thought about now and tomorrow and how to survive. And sadly, Pedro lost his life when he was sent across the viaduct with the weapon to shoot at us. And I just want to say that, going in that young and having a judge look down upon me and call me incorrigible, I didn't even understand what that meant. When I heard that word, I remember going back to the bullpen, asking all the kids in my section, in the bullpen, what does incorrigible mean? And they're like, I don't know. And then the public defender, she came to the back. She's like Xavier, listen, you're being tried as an adult. I said, yeah, what does incorrigible mean? And she said, Xavier, that means that the judge thinks you're never going to change. The judge thinks that you're never going to change. And when she said that, I mean, I didn't have a sense to argue that, to be quite honest with you. But I'll never forget what that meant. And, for me, I was deeply immersed in gang life. Like, that was my life. That's all I knew as a kid. But years later, obviously, that does impact my perspective on what was said and how, in so many ways, they had deemed me as a monster very early on. Being transferred into the adult court system meant, sadly, that I would be faced with an adult sentencing scheme between the range of 20 years and 60 years. The judge didn't give me much indication of whether or not initially, I was being viewed as someone who should receive the highest extent of punishment. But I found out a year and a half later, after a series of continuances, that the state's attorney was offering me 40 years in prison. And I'm like, 40 years in prison? Like, at the time, I'm like 14 and a half. I'm like, 40 years in prison? Like, I can't do 40 years in prison. And then my public defender, Herschella Conyers, said that under the current law, that would mean I would serve 20, and she wasn't having that. she decided to fight for me. And the best that she could do for me was 20 years. So remember, under the before truth and sentencing, you serve day for day, meaning for every day that you serve, one day will be taken off. So with a 20-year sentence, I can ideally be out of prison in 10 years. And even though that seemed like light years away from where I was at that time of my life, I still had the mindset to know that that's better than 20, 30, and 40 years straight, and so my response was, I can't do that. And so she went to conference. She fought for me. She convinced the judge to remember that I was a child. She shared about all my traumas. She talked about all the things that I had experienced up until that point. She had shed light upon my previous experience at Maryville Academy, a group home where I was at, where I resided for a year and a half. And while there, how I stayed out of trouble. Interestingly, between 9 and 13, I had 19 arrests and 7 convictions. But between 12 and a half and 13 and a half, I had no arrests. So imagine that. And there at Maryville, I was doing well. I was in school. I was, in track and field. I was doing a shot put. I was number 2 in a mile run in my class, in my school at River Trails Junior High. I remember being involved in sports, doing my chores. I was never truly like an aggressive, mean, or I just wasn't, a bad child. If you got to know me, if you spent time with me, you treated me fairly and kindly, you would see the kid come out of me. And interestingly, she fought hard enough to convince the judge in the state to offer a 25-year sentence. A 25-year sentence to me obviously was still a long time, but I knew that, judging based upon my co-defendant's outcome, my co-defendant who was 14 at the time, who had just received 40 years for going to trial, I knew that, I was just as guilty. In fact, I was more guilty. And I didn't want to risk that. And I just simply wanted to move on and get with my life. And when my mother came to the back holding cage where I was at, after my sentencing, I remember telling my mother, that I was going to change for the better. I remember trying to convince my mother and wipe away her tears and tell her that I was going to go to college and and get involved in programs and stay out of trouble and come out and live a better life. And I was just concocting this magnificent lie. In my mind at the time, I was concocting this lie because I didn't want her to cry. Interestingly, I did grow up in prison. My experiences in there as a child were very challenging. I was in trouble quite often. I fought a whole lot, starting from the juvenile system, and at 17 being woken up and taken into the adult prison system on my 17th birthday. That just meant that I would continue to fight. I would continue to go to solitary confinement. And after several stints in solitary confinement and assaulting a correctional officer during a gang riot at Joliet Correctional Center, they sent me to Pontiac Correctional Center. And at Pontiac Correctional Center, I was placed in a hole for a year. I know I can't see all your faces, but do you all know what the hole is, solitary confinement? Are you familiar with that? So solitary confinement basically is when you're placed in a cell and you don't have a television or radio, and you have some of your basic necessities, shampoo, soap, maybe some papers to write letters, but you don't have any source of entertainment. You can't leave your cell. And the cell is probably about 5 by 9 if you're lucky. You have a bunk, you're there. I was placed behind a steel door with a chuck hole because I assaulted a correctional officer. So what that meant was I was not only deprived visibly, not only was there sort of visual deprivation of being able to look out of my cell, but I was really shut out from a lot of sound because the door was quite thick. It was a metal door. And so my hearing only began, what I would be able to hear would only be from a good 10 to 15 feet away from my cell. And as someone stated in the comment here, basically there's no human contact. And so to experience that for a year and having only like once or twice out of my cell a week to go into a small yard, you can imagine the existential nightmare that was for me. Not only struggling to survive the physical challenges of hunger at times when the food wasn't plentiful, and which was never plentiful, but also just the psychological torture of time passing and not having any sense of the time of day. I didn't have a window. I also struggled spiritually, often in tears, often flashing back So I'm gonna get past that part. I came out of the hole a year later. When I came out the hole, I was 19 years old, and I was determined. I was determined to leave the gang that I was a part of. And when I came out, it was a scary thing because, quite frankly, they could have killed me if they wanted to. Um, I got a photo album. It was literally almost this size, and I tore the spiral out, the plastic spiral, and I took both covers and I placed them on top of each other, and I put holes in all four corners. And I tore the thick lining of my sheet, and I made 3 strings, and I had tied one to this end and then the other to this end. And I put another string here and another string there, and I looped it behind my neck here, and I tied the bottom 2 behind my back. And I put 2 jackets on. And when I went out to Pontiac West House after my release from solitary confinement, I kept that on until we hit the yard. And when we hit the yard, I was surrounded by my fellow gang members who simply wanted to know, why did I want to turn my back on the nation? Like, that's exactly how it was framed. And I tried my best to convince them that I wasn't turning my back on the nation, but that I simply wanted to live a better life. And looking around at gun towers and bars and bricks, they couldn't quite understand what that meant. And interestingly, that was met with a lot of antagonism, but also, some people who knew me already, who empathized with me, who just simply knew I was a good guy. Like, they didn't speak up, but I can tell by their facial expressions that they didn't want the worst outcome. And in the midst of that, one of the older guys walked up and he put his arm around my shoulder and he told everybody else to disperse around the yard. And this individual who had his arm around my shoulder was older, he was bigger, and I was staring down at his hand, and it was under the pretenses of having a conversation with me, but I thought he was going to stab me, to be honest with you. And he had walked me to the furthest part of the yard, away from the gun tower. And so the further we got away, the more interest I began to feel, because I'm like, if this guy were to try to stab me, there's no way I'll be able to have any type of security. They couldn't even possibly see. And by the time we got to the far end of the yard, interestingly, he was telling me how he had wished he had made the same decision that I was making. He had been in prison for over 20-something years since he was young. He had made a lot of poor decisions himself, as he expressed. And with that understanding and with what I was doing, he said that he wanted me to, number 1, go to school. Number 2, don't ever represent the gang ever again. And number 3, most importantly, because of where we were at, he said, don't get caught up in no nonsense with no other gangs, because we don't want to have to come and save you. Because he felt the decision that I was making was putting me in really in the crosshairs of a lot of potential threat and violence, because no longer being a member, that meant that I wouldn't be walking the yard with them. I wouldn't be in line with them. I won't be sitting with them while we're eating any longer. I won't be bunked up in cellies with any of my fellow gang members. I will be out with general population. I would have to navigate that as a 19-year-old kid. Looking at that experience, it was like a psychological castration. I didn't know who I was. And slowly but surely, I had to discover who I was apart from the gang. And what that meant for me was getting involved in school. And what that meant for me was just a lot of deep just reflection upon my life, and reading the Bible and reading poetry, getting caught up in works and books that really just inspired me to want to recognize my own inherent value as a human being, because I didn't see who I was apart from the gang. After staying out of trouble and, thank God, navigating that very violent environment without any challenges, I ended up making it to a medium security prison. When I made it to medium security prison, I got involved in college once again. I ended up earning an Associate of Arts, an Associate's in General Education. I got a bachelor's degree in social science, had a 4.0 GPA, was inducted into the Franklin Honor Society for Outstanding Scholarship, and was hoping to be able to be a Roosevelt graduate, but that wasn't possible. But I was happy with where I landed. Having a bachelor's degree, looking back at when I was arrested, was very exciting, because when I got arrested, I was in 7th grade. And I was performing very poorly, I must add. And as a part of an honor community in prison, I carried that higher than the labels that were imposed upon me. And I got out at age 26. I served 13 years in prison. When I came out of prison at age 26, I had high expectations of going into a halfway house, which meant that I would start a life at a transitional living facility, and while there, begin to slowly put the pieces together, spend time with my family, get to learn how to do things that I never learned, like learning how to drive a car. I never knew how to drive a car. In fact, I didn't even know how to use public transportation. I had to ask someone to please help me, because when I was arrested, we were using transfers with the little holes that you pump on top of the paper, and if they missed that hole, you get another ride, But y'all don't know about that. That was my experience growing up, and now suddenly everything's digital, and you have these cars. And so I got help the first time, and I figured it out eventually. But slowly but surely, I had a lot of challenges, and the most immediate one was that instead of arriving at a halfway house, I found myself landing at a homeless shelter. And so being at a homeless shelter the first few days out, as you can imagine, was very challenging, because the halfway house that I thought I would go to had ran out of space. And so they sent me to Lakeview Shelter over by Belmont and Halsted. And for me to spend my first few nights out in a homeless shelter was not only challenging, but it was like a complete disillusionment. I had to believe everything that I saw on TV. You get an education, the world opens up to you. You can, opportunities are there at your fingertips. However, these college institutions or many others, and rightfully, should encourage youth to aspire towards things. Sadly and swiftly, I came to realize that society wasn't going to accept me, even with a degree. I was denied job after job. The first few months out, I was unemployed. I finally convinced my parole officer to let me go back to my mother. By then, my mother was diagnosed and she was getting treatment. By then, my brother was already getting treatment. By then, my two young sisters, who had children when they were young, their kids were older. And so I was really just out into a total new world. And my first job that I got after several months, after I think 4 months actually, and during that time, before that, I was volunteering. My first job was at Starbucks. I joke around often. I say I went from lockdowns to lattes, because my whole world changed there. I ended up being a barista there for 2.5 years. And while doing that, I was able to go back to Roosevelt University. And I did earn my master's degree from Roosevelt University in 2006. And since then, I've had great privileges to work in positions that were designed to keep children out of the criminal justice system and out of the grave. I worked in gang intervention, violence prevention. I worked for Ceasefire. I worked for Catholic Charities. I was doing a lot of crisis intervention in different communities across the city. And interestingly, that is where I found my home. I thought that was my purpose. And in fact, I was most definitely convinced of that. And then working at Northwestern, having that very up close perspective, having to understand what they were navigating, even, and not just in terms of the day-to-day challenges, not just in terms of going to the courthouse or the principal's office or to their parents to help, get them through challenges, but really just hearing from them more, more in depth in terms around the emotional struggle, the emotional challenges, the scars that never just went away, the systems that not only ignored those traumas, but only exacerbated them, and being with the Northwestern Juvenile Project for 5.5 years, as I had mentioned, having that perspective and recognizing that there's more to the story that needs to be told. I did have the opportunity in 2014 to follow that inclination by joining the campaign for the FairSentencing of Youth. I've been here now for 6 years and several months. I started as a youth advocate to working as a policy associate, and then a senior advisor, and then now more recently being appointed by the board of directors as the co-executive director, along with founding director Jody Ken Levy. And so I've been there for some time now. But what's most extraordinary is that this role has given me the ability to advocate and try to help totally change and revamp what it means to administer juvenile justice in this country, starting with the most egregious sentence, the most egregious thing that a child could ever experience in our justice system, that being life without parole today. But just as recent as 2005 was a death penalty. In Roper v. Simmons, it was argued that children's brains were not fully formed. And not only that, but kids has a great capacity for positive change. That no child, should be, instantly deemed as someone who was not capable of redemption, but that in fact the neuroscience, looking at the brain, the prefrontal cortex, and how kids are more reliant upon the limbic system, the amygdala to be more specific, it really was indicative of how and why kids are incapable of overcoming peer pressure, of why kids often give in to their environments. In fact, environments that they simply cannot escape. And so looking back upon my life and then remembering all the people I left behind, I felt that finally, like, this is my purpose, and that is to raise awareness around this important issue, to share my story, but also to help people understand that there are moral and legal reasons why kids should not be given this extreme consequence, evidenced by what we know through the neurosciences, but also evidenced by what's undeniable to me, and that is once upon a time I was deemed as incorrigible. Once upon a time I had 19 arrests and 7 convictions, everything from armed robberies, aggravated assaults, weapon charges, shootings, you name it. As a child, I was deemed as a monster. But I did grow up and I did change. And I witnessed many others just like me as I grew up in the system who became increasingly more remorseful, more mature, more determined to come out and simply live a normal life someday. Some of us made it out. Many of us are still in there. And so that's where my fight brings me. And so our work, though I can be very technical in explaining how it's a multi-pronged effort, through litigation, legislative advocacy, public education, coalition building. Like, to me, all that means, and that is simply this: infusing the work that we are doing with the truth of kids' capacity for positive change. It means sharing my story. It means bringing people who have similar experiences to get on the front lines, to speak to legislators, prosecutors, judges, to help inform stakeholders that, look, we can no longer talk about kids in the abstract. We can no longer believe in what was once said, that kids are super predators. That's not the truth. Not only are we living examples of the inverse reality of that, but we're also here to say that these kids who are now in the system have just as much, if not greater potential. In fact, we navigated and we overcame despite the system. Imagine if we can create a system that's laser focused on ensuring meaningful opportunities. Imagine if we create a system that ensures that kids can thrive, can grow, and can remain free of harm.
You are so amazing. Do you need a pause? Xavier, do you need us to talk for a second and pause? Because you are just amazing.
Yeah, we see some claps.
You brought tears to all our eyes. And you have made the impossible possible. You are just a shining light that we need in this world. We need more of you. And thank you for what you do and what you've done.
Thank you. And I know that also I've gone over a little bit here, and again, the reality is that I do relive these experiences, but I know it's for a good cause, and I've witnessed great examples of that. I know the importance of vulnerability in our community, and it's something that we had never exercised growing up. I wasn't able to cry in the system. I wasn't able to be a child, as a matter of fact, and just being with Northwestern University and having all those courageous individuals who shared of those traumas, who talked about the molestation, who talked about the abuse, who talked about all the things that they went through. Like, I feel like I owe it to them. And if I'm going to do this work, I want to be able to be as transparent and open as possible. And if I have 1 hour with you, I'm not going to give you this wonky talk. I'm going to speak from my heart, because that's really what it's all about. And I just hope that anything that I've shared here can stay with you, and that you be inclined and willing and wanting to make a difference for kids. Interestingly and sadly, this sentence is imposed upon children at a very disproportionate rate. In fact, Black children get this sentence at a per capita rate that is 10 times that of white children.
Yeah.
70% of all kids in our country who are given life without parole are children of color.
for sure.
You look at other things that are interestingly and very sadly true is the fact that, over 79% had experienced abuse from a caretaker prior to that offense. Even more so, the young girls, very sadly, who were given life without parole, more than 69%, actually 70% of them were sexually abused prior to committing homicide. In many instances, they finally fought back against those who were harming them, whether it was an abusive parent or relative or someone who had them in sex trafficking. These young girls, they acted out of those traumas, they responded, and they did what they could to protect themselves, but they were given life without parole. Some are out, some are still in. And so, again, I just encourage all of us to know that we're not just talking about, in terms of like looking at the body of those inside, we're talking about kids who come from communities for the most part, just like mine. And so it's important that we remain focused on the fact that, it's disproportionately imposed, but, in terms of reform efforts, it's always been a bipartisan effort that made it possible. And so I just encourage everyone to just think of it in that way.
Yeah.
Any questions? I'm sorry, I know I can continue.
No. I think it really highlights the importance of really meeting people where they're at, listening to the story and understanding that we all have experiences that are hidden behind closed doors, and that drive us, or the circumstances and drive us to act or react, especially when we're growing up. And no one talks about it.
Right.
The prevalence of abuse and molestation and all kinds of other things just at home, and violence in the home, is much higher than what is stated. And people need to really understand that context and understand how people are treated every day, not only in their home, but when they go outside. If you're on a bus or in an elevator, people are afraid of you because you have dark skin. And to have to live with that as you move through every single day when you're in 7th grade or at any age is extremely traumatizing and extremely stressful. And it's just the context. If people could just seek to understand more, you would be better off. But I want to let other people speak.
Yes, I see Linda. Linda, you have your hand raised.
Yes, I do. Thanks so much. Xavier, I've heard you speak many times and have had many conversations with you, and I never cease to be moved. I want to highlight for everyone that despite Xavier's battle, the battle was not won. We had a challenging time hiring Xavier. Xavier, what year did we hire you?
That was 2008.
So the university did not allow us initially to hire Xavier because they claimed he had outstanding traffic tickets. And I remember Karen and I talking about this. Outstanding traffic tickets.
He didn't drive though.
I didn't know how to drive. There you go. See, I was a kid who came out and
I was escuchando. I was listening. What?
But it was not relevant to the job. And we knew that the university simply wanted to avoid hiring him because of his record. So Karen and I went to Evanston and we met with the lawyers, and we pointed out politely that they were violating federal law, and they finally allowed us to hire him. But the point of my comment here is that the battle is not over.
That's right.
In graduate school applications at Northwestern and many other places, they still have a box where you are forced to report whether or not you have been convicted of a felony. So that the problems are and limit, it's sufficient to keep me in business for the next 150 years, because we still treat people like Xavier the same way. Not much has changed. And we still do not provide opportunities for than to work
Yeah.
because of the box that's ubiquitous on job applications, applications to the bar, applications for medical licenses, applications to be a manicurist in some states. So for all of you to know, Xavier's story is heartwarming, but the battle is not won.
That's right, and it's interesting because I'll never forget. I was like, my traffic tickets, like, and you know, the reality is that, and I often say that, you know, where my life has landed today has really been because of like the determination of individuals who refuse to accept those labels, who refuse to see me for the worst thing I've ever done. And Linda, I thank you because you're one person, even before you knew me, who advocated very strongly for me. I want to tell a quick story. It has nothing, I mean, not that it has nothing to do with it, but it just goes to show how, you know, when you have the type of experiences that I've had and have been in the system, there really is no recognition of who you are and what you become today. Like there is a point where they simply, you know, want to treat you as if you're still the worst of the worst. When I was working at Catholic Charities, I was working in back of the yards. In back of the yards, you know, it was a very violent time in 2007. One of my clients, one of my kids, unfortunately, was involved in a homicide. He wasn't the one who pulled the trigger; he was there. But when it happened, I had seen him just hours before. In fact, I remember telling him to go home because things were crazy in the neighborhood. There were other shootings that had just happened. And he unfortunately chose to stay out in the streets with his buddies because like that's you know, that was what he thought he was supposed to do. And he was one of the kids that I had very hard time working with. In fact, oftentimes I would go pick him up from school. I will go pick him up at home, drop him off in front of the school. He'll go through the school and go out the back door. And I was doing this for like weeks and weeks until I found out that his attendance was like horrible. I'm like, how is it possible there's horrible attendance? When I drop him off every morning, there's something's wrong here. And sure enough, he was going out the back door. Well, unfortunately, because he saw me, though he was not always listening to me, because he saw me as a source of consolation and support, because was always there for him when he had problems at school, at home, and in court, whatever. I was always there for him when he needed food, money, whatever. Catholic Charities, I would leverage every single opportunity and resource to benefit him in his life and try to help him as best as I could, because I knew that he was about to fall through the cracks. And when he got arrested and was questioned at the police station at homicide, he said that he was with me during the time of the incident. So understand, like I am a ceasefire outreach worker. I do gang intervention, and my priority is my client. Like I care, not only do I do it as a job description, like I truly and thoroughly love these kids. And so when he said that, the homicide detectives called my phone and they wanted me to come to the station for questioning. And when they asked me where was I at during a certain time, I didn't know that they had my client at the police station. I didn't know this. I just knew that I am formerly incarcerated. I was convicted of a homicide when I was young. A murder just happened in our community. Homicide is calling me. Why are you calling me? And so my natural instincts were, I can tell you exactly where I was at. I was at the time I was at a place called Pisa Nova with my supervisor when we heard about the shooting. Because I remember we got the radar, we heard from our office, and we went flying back just a half a mile back to where to our neighborhood to address the issue and try to resolve conflict there. But interestingly, when I said, you know, I was at Pisa Nova with Oscar Contreras, blah, 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 they're like, okay, then no problems. Thanks for the information. And they hung up. When I found out hours later that my client was trying to use me as an alibi, it was too late. I couldn't help him if I wanted to. They had charged him with murder. Now I'm at Northwestern University. Now over a year and a half has passed by. Now trial is underway. And now they want to use me against my former client. They want to have me stand in the court, sit on the stand, in fact, and say, he was not with me. They want me to contradict what he had previously said at the police station. And for me, look, I recognize the importance of the law, and I appreciate, fair and just mercy. Like I think that's important. But I'm not going to get on the stand. like I'm allergic to courtrooms, point blank. I don't go into courtrooms. I'm not going to get on the stand. You know, I was not there. I can't speak to his innocence or guilt, and I'm not going to even try. And I ended up ignoring those calls. They subpoenaed me. I ignored that notification. The sheriffs came to my front steps, dropped off, saw me through the window, and said, "You have a subpoena here," and left it at my front steps. And I just ignored it. I didn't go to court. They kept calling me over and over again. Interestingly, you know, after about, I think 2.5, 3 months of them like really hounding me and doing all they can to get me in that courtroom, I ended up walking into our office at Northwestern University. And when I walked in, I walked them and I went past the conference table, and lo and behold, the homicide detectives were sitting there along with the state's attorney waiting for me to arrive. And when I walked in, I didn't know who they were. I walked right past them. I went to my space in the office over there, and when they said Xavier, and I was like, "What?" They're like, "You know, can we have a word with you?" I was like, and sure enough, these individuals had waited for hours for me to arrive. And when I came back from my interview, conducting the interview, they wanted to have a conversation with me. They wanted to let me know in person that if I did not go to court, that I was going to be charged, and all these things. They were threatening me. And when they wanted to have a private space, the only office that was open was Linda's office. And interestingly, when we were back there in Linda's office, about a good 20, 30 minutes into that scenario, Linda came busting in the door saying, "Excuse me, but what's going on here? Can we help you?" She was very assertive, very protective, like a mother. Like she literally was like, you know, "I don't know what's going on, but Xavier is a good person. He works hard." You know, like she started to advocate for me in that moment. And suddenly their demeanor, which at first was very intimidating and trying to be mean, suddenly became, "Oh no, we don't mean no offense. We don't mean to come here, and we don't understand this is important work that you all are doing. We just want to, you know, get," like their whole demeanor changed. And there was no talk of taking me in and questioning me further. So long story short, Linda has been advocating for me for quite some time. And that's why I love you, Linda, so much. I know I'm not the only one, but I'll make a long story short, I eventually did have to go to the court. But I think my lack of cooperation there convinced the state's attorney that if they put me on the stand, it wasn't going to be in their best interest. And so they gave up. They let me leave the courthouse the day of that, what was supposed to happen. And unfortunately, my client did get found guilty. Unfortunately, he did get 27 years. But what was most important to me is that I'm not going to do anything to support an adult system to harm a child. I'm not going to do that. You know, the moment you put a child into the adult system, the injustice has already been done. And so there's nothing, I don't want to contribute to that. You know, Linda, you have to go?
I have to go. I've got another meeting, not as interesting as this one. But
okay, Linda.
Xavier, we love you. Thank you so much. We love you.
Love you too, Linda.
Thank you, Linda.
5 minutes.
Bye.
See you, Linda. I know we have 5 minutes, but I just want to give others a chance to ask questions.
Nico, do you want to ask your question right now?
Yeah, so I just had a comment. I'm glad that they had you speak from the heart, because definitely touched mine. I remember, I don't really talk about this much, but I had like a lot of big struggle with my family in terms of corrections, and my brother coming in and out of things. And I remember he was just above the age of 18 when he was in prison. And I remember going many times. I was much younger than him into prison to visit him, passing holidays there. And just imagining him, you know, he was only just a little bit older than me. And, you know, in terms of maturity level, we were about the same, but just the tremendous difficulty, as you mentioned, you know, the things that are unseen by a lot of people, things that happen in prison, things that just no one knows about, you know, the factors and all the influences that can change the mind of someone who isn't, you know, that you said, you know, and I'm a scientific person, so the prefrontal cortex not being developed, I mean, that is so real. And especially when you're in such an environment where you need to protect yourself. And my brother, he had just started college, and then when he came out, like just the terrible, response from society that hasn't had the same experiences, isn't in touch with all the difficulties that bring someone into the system, and then that keeps that makes it hard for people to stay away from that, and makes it really hard to move on. And so, your story of resiliency and coming back and, using your story to benefit others is really outstanding. And it's been a while since I've talked about things like this, and, sort of a part of my life that I don't think about much, but it's something that, is affects, the person that's in the system, but, it has a big effect on everyone, and something that I'm glad you shared, and is for everyone, and it means a lot. Thanks.
It's important that what you shared, because there's a saying that when someone's incarcerated, their family is incarcerated with them. Like their life suddenly becomes under arrest. Like I'm now the greatest joy of my life. I have a 9-year-old daughter, Sophia, and I cannot imagine having her away from me, locked in some system for a mistake that she made as a child. I cannot imagine that. Hold on 1 second. I'm sorry if that interrupted. I have to disconnect my phone from the computer, but I cannot imagine having that. And so for you, Nico, like to have, a brother in the system, someone who I imagine you looked up to, or someone you were perhaps very close to, like, and then having to go into these places, right? The searching, like having to go into the courtrooms that are unforgiving, the chairs, like there's no sofas in courtrooms. They're all hard slabs of cement. Like it's just very unforgiving, very, punitive, not just to people in the system, but families. And so like a big part of our movement, which is focused, which is led by people who have been impacted by the system, a big part of that community are people who have loved ones serving. In fact, before the campaign for fair sentencing of youth even existed, it was the family members that were advocating from the outside. They had created their own email listserv. They were keeping up with legislation. They were looking around the courts. They were sharing their stories and testimony if and when there was an opportunity. But now they have built a coalition, along with now an even increasingly bigger network of formerly incarcerated folks. So imagine, fighting to end life without parole for kids in the country, having 2,800 individuals who have this sentence. And then after a series of U.S. Supreme Court decisions and legislative actions across the country, we not only have ended life without parole in more than 23 states, an additional 6 states no longer have this practice. So people are coming home. There are still quite a few inside the system, and we're still fighting for them. But if you were serving life without parole and you came out of prison because of the wondrous and amazing work of an organization and a national coalition, where's your heart going to take you? And so our national network called ICAN now consists of over 130 former life sentence children, meaning they had served decades in prison, 20, 30, 40 years in prison. Now they're out, and they're a part of the Incarcerated Children's Advocacy Network, which is an initiative of our campaign. And they are now leading the work. They are now educating stakeholders. They are now doing everything from sharing their stories online to walking the steps of the Supreme Court, camping out. In fact, during Medina versus Malvo, just in 2019, we stepped outside the courthouse. We made it through the line. And when the justices were hearing Malvo's case, there was about 35 of us, individuals who were one sentence to extreme sentences kids, sitting there face to face with the justices, along with family members, and being there as living examples of positive change. No longer can you think about us in the abstract. Look us in the eyes and tell us that we are irreparably corrupt. Look us in the eyes and tell us that we're irredeemable, that we're incorrigible. And interestingly, before they can even hand down that decision months later, which we had anticipated would come in January and February, we were able to end life without parole in Virginia, which made that case moot, and therefore rendering us the victory we had long fought hard for. And so we now are looking towards, again, January, February. We just had a Supreme Court hearing. on election day, Mississippi versus Jones. Brett Jones was a 15-year-old kid who had a hard time with his family, was abused and neglected, had lashed out and ended up killing his grandfather when his grandfather tried to separate him from his girlfriend. Only a kid could ever think to do such a thing. Only a kid could have that level, that type of visceral anger and response, because that is the limbic brain. That is the most primitive part of your brain. That is the emotionally driven part of your brain that says, oh my God, if I can't be with her, then my life is over, right? Like only a child could think and feel this way, or someone who has very deep-seated challenged mental health issues. And so this kid acted out, and since that very unfortunate mistake, he has changed. He's grown up in the system. He's changed his life. He's involved in programs. He's outstanding. No disciplinary tickets. Like he's like a model prisoner. And I hate to say prisoner, but he's someone in the system who has demonstrated positive change. And how can this individual spend the rest of his life in prison? He's deeply remorseful and sad and sorry. He wants to come out and live a normal life, get back to the community. He wants to do all these things, but he has to live out that nightmare of someday dying in prison after serving more time in prison than anyone who got arrested as an adult could ever even possibly serve, because he went in as a child and he would possibly die when he's 60 or 70 in an environment like that. And so imagine never being free for something you did as a kid, or imagine someone having to live there and change for the better, and yet and still his humanity is being denied and ignored. And so we see so many like him across the nation. I know so many personally. I get letters, mail, communications all the time. I see their gifts, their talents. I see everything about them, and I know that they need to be free. And so I know we're over on our time, but I just want to say again, thanks for all of you. If we do have time and you all have a couple questions, I still have a little bit more, because I realize that I have like pretty much used up a lot of space, and I'm sorry about that.
No, we said you could speak freely, and we meant it.
No
So
apologies.
yeah, no
Xavier,
apologies.
God, please, seriously, we wanted you to speak from your heart. That's my commitment to people. That's who I am as a leader. That's what this center is all about. And everybody who joins me in this center understands that if we don't seek to understand and really listen to people's stories and context, we will really never understand why you do what you do, right? We each have a story, and that helps propel us forward to whatever mission we have, our goals, or our behaviors in life. And if we don't seek to understand that, especially within the health setting and health context and a system, this is a healthcare system and a university that is ivory tower.
That's right.
And considered premier. And if we can't get to learning how to build bridges and listening and understanding, or seeking to understand, empathy, leading with empathy and love, we will never get anywhere.
Right.
And we're seeing it play out now in the country. So we have a lot of work to do, and we have been so privileged and blessed by the gift you just gave us for this last hour. And it really was a gift, because you opened your heart and you shared it with us, and that is transformative.
Thank you all for having me, and let this not be the last time you hear, think, and
we want you back, Xavier.
Yes,
yes, exactly.
You have an open invitation to come back at any time.
Appreciate it. And likewise, if we can support in any way. I mean, you visit, www.fairsentencingofyouth.org. Again, it's www.fairsentencingofyouth.org. And you can learn about ways to get engaged, keep up with what we're doing around the states, and learn how to plug in.
Do you work with Arnie Duncan? Is that part of his work?
No, it's a national campaign. So our is laser focused on our issues. So we have not though other sectors are of importance, when we talk about the evolving standard of decency when it comes to kids, education, child welfare, like these are things that we feel we are impacting through the work, because by elevating the humanity of all kids, in particular Black and brown kids, it shouldn't be hard to understand why zero tolerance policies are wrong. It shouldn't be hard to understand, why kids, in the child welfare system should be thoroughly, washed over and protected. Like like but the sad reality is that in our country, if people are convinced that it's okay to give a child life without parole, if we can do that to a child, then what more, is permissible? And so that's where we see our fight. And so we say instead that if a child's not worthy of our mercy, if a child's not worthy of mercy at all, then who amongst us is? And that's where our fight brings us. So please do follow the work, stick with us, and we're also on Facebook, we're on social media. We have regular updates there, and thank you for being part of such a wonderful, not only university, but apparently a wonderful initiative. And the programs that you all are creating to elevate voices like mine are just really amazing. And Melissa, your leadership, along with that of Araceli, Magdalena, and others here, like I'm convinced that you all have many more voices to hear ahead. And I hope that what we all experience here can spring out into the world, and most importantly, help leaders like Nico to be able to share his story. Like we all need to be vulnerable here, right? The courage that you displayed here, Nico, I appreciate that. Like that's what we want for all of us, to be courageous in these moments, to share and recognize the human connections, and to try to pass our differences to see our common humanity. And so thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of your day. I know we're all like,
Thank you.
I hope this was a time mental break from everything else. This is
This
hopeful
was
that
amazing. You have such a great heart, and it was such an honor
Thank
to
you.
have you
Exactly.
speaking. It just, you have forever changed my life.
Thank
You
you.
have.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
I
Thank
appreciate
you.
it.
Thank you for everyone that joined us today. If there are any last minute questions, I can forward them over to Xavier, and then we can share them in a follow-up email. With that, we do have an event coming up that I'm gonna let either Maggie or Nemo talk about on Saturday. But thank you for everyone that stayed for this over an hour long event that was more than worth it.
Indeed. Thank you, Araceli. So this Saturday between 10 to 1, we will be having a youth leadership conference to honor the amazing Virginia Bishop, who also worked at Northwestern, and she did a lot of community work with youth, especially in Humboldt Park. So we will be talking about health equity and how it relates to COVID and gun violence. We have Dr. Aida Giachelo coming in to talk about COVID. We have Ortega to do a poetry circle, and we've also we have Build coming in to talk about gangs, and again at how it relates to health equity. So you're all
For
welcome.
youth, by youth.
Yes,
Dr. Bishop's memory.
indeed.
True
Yes.
social justice. For
You all got a good agenda. Y'all don't need me.
Of course we do. We need folks like you. We really do. We need more of you.
I appreciate it. I just like hearing that you all are talking through these things and like being very intentional about, thinking about not just what we see in the news media, that mugshot, that the headline, it's all very dehumanizing. But when you allow folks to come to this space to share stories and to really look at the humanity of these kids, like it makes a big difference. Proximity, right? Proximity, be proximate. Ryan Stevenson talks about being proximate and how oftentimes that's very healing, educational, and most importantly, creating an environment that's not only healing, but helps us to see a better vision forward in terms of the work. And so I'm gonna get going here, but thanks again to everyone. You have a beautiful agenda, and if I can hop in on any of that, send me a link, and if I can come, I'll be a fly on the wall. Okay, you all, if that's possible, I'll be there.
Of course, we will be sharing that information. Yes.
Take care, everyone.
Okay,
Thank
bye
you.
everyone.
Take
Thank
care.
you for joining.
Bye.